Well, the recent video that I saw was something you put out about RFK. And I was so appreciative because in many ways, like with Peter and I, like we happen to be fairly left. But when it comes to things like libertarian civil liberties, RFK, we're extremely reasonable. And I was very pleased that you were also very reasonable in your assessment, because there are definitely things I do not like about RFK. We've spoken about it. He is wrong on Israel. I mean, there's a lot of things. But to say that he wouldn't be good in this role is just unreasonable, right? Like that, it's just so obvious that he's better than any pharma tool that Kamala would put in. So yeah, talk a little bit about that. Like because obviously talking about Kennedy was important enough to make one of your bigger clips.
Yeah, I think so. Just because, I see him as a figure who actually is one of the few people that Trump has nominated. There's a couple of these guys, and we can go into it, but I think there's a couple of these guys that he's nominated that actually is somewhat of a threat to the existing order. And RFK Jr. is probably at the top of the list, in my opinion, just because of the things that he's come out against. He's not just, I know the mainstream media more or less just paints him as kind of this nutcase kook guy that is putting bear in Central Park, and he's got the brain worm, and he's also has the anti-vaccine stance. But there's a lot more that he's talked about that I think is actually going to be potentially very revolutionary in terms of the system that we have. He's talked about going up against big pharma, stopping them from putting ads, basically buying the news, right? If you think about the news and why they even run ads, because I'm not going out and getting like Eloquist, I don't think those ads are just, they're ways to buy loyalty from the media. And he's also talked about like gutting the FDA. I know these are very like crazy. It is crazy in one sense, but it's not really that crazy, right? We've had other people, on the left, you talk about like defund the police. That's a pretty provocative stance. Here he's talking about the FDA, and the FDA, it clearly has some problems where you have almost half of the funding comes from industry. Yeah. So how can you possibly regulate an industry that pays you? So these are the things that I think are really, and also on top of that, you do just have the underlying issue of chronic disease that's increasing in this country. I think we spend the most on healthcare, but we certainly don't get the returns on it. So it's like, okay, what we're doing right now isn't really working. So what he's talking about potentially could work. And he is a big threat to that existing order of, the pharmaceutical industrial complex. You mentioned the chemical industrial complex, putting all these pesticides on food. So that's kind of why I felt the need to make that piece. And I think it was important too, because a lot of people, I kind of see, the name of the channel, right? 5149. I kind of see myself as a figure who's somewhat kind of bridging the gap between all different, I would say ideologies in America, right? I'm kind of, because I kind of am able to see both sides of things, and I'm just like, okay, it seems like there's some things that they're right about, something that there's wrong about. Let me try to put together something hopefully fair, still biased, but hopefully fair enough where people can like accept that message.
Oh, now, James, you're talking about things like nuance. That is not something that the people on the tribal teams like. They don't do nuance. They're all or nothing, especially among Democrats on the left. Like, I definitely have, I'm done with them. They are ridiculous. But, and one of the main reasons why they are so ridiculous is because they fail to see any gray area of anything. And that is why we can't have nice things.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why we can't have nice things.
Right. No, I just mean politically amongst, I know. Well, corporate money and the fact that they're all whores, that's a problem.
Yeah. And that was the video that I did before the RFK one that I did on YouTube. That actually was one of my big videos that I kind of hit a home run on, is talking about kind of the evolution of a figure like Joe Rogan, who, if you look back just a couple of years, he was very much in agreement with a lot of the principles of the Democratic Party. You call it the left, you call it, liberalism, whatever. And he's talking about, things like gay marriage. He's talking about being, Michelle Obama being potentially a good candidate for president. And, what I saw was from that side of things, you know, you were very much, if you didn't go along with every single thing that the party wanted you to do, you were almost just Hitler at that point. And so at that, it really makes it a tough place for somebody kind of in the middle to say, you know, if I'm good on 80, 90%, if I agree with you 80, 90% of the time, but I'm not all the way there with you. You know, I don't agree that we should be doing, let's say, one of the top issues that he talks about a lot is like, I'm not all the way there with you in terms of like, hey, I don't know if transgender conversation should belong in middle school classrooms. I'm not there yet. Then you're kind of outcast, and it's almost like, okay, we have nowhere to go. And he also talks about how they just kind of quash Bernie's whole movement and said, hey, this whole thing, you're kind of not welcome in our party. And so then where are these people going to go? You know, the other side is, you know, the Republicans, they've kind of, and this is, I could talk about this later too, because now you have kind of the new right that's happening, and it doesn't really gel well with the old right. So there's some interesting things happening there as well. But it's like one side is like, yeah, sure, join us. You know, we have a big unity party thing. And I think that's like how, you know, I think the Democratic Party is going to really have to do some retooling if they're to kind of come back from this.